Check 1, 2. Okay. We are live and we're getting started.
Scott, I find this to be extremely timely and appropriate, considering what's going on in Britain. Well, but every week there's something we don't right, right, but it's just getting. Sorry.
No problem. No problem. Okay. Thank you guys for coming. It's good to see you guys again. And we, had a nice break over the summer. Thank you, Scott, for driving through the crazy rush hour traffic again. Glad you got here safe. We're starting a little bit late, so we're just gonna get right into it. We got our live broadcast started, and we're back up on 5 platforms. We're up on Rumble again. Rumble wasn't working for a while, so we got that working again tonight. And we're just going to get right into it. So we are continuing with the Second Amendment today of the Bill of Rights, and we're looking forward to completing all of the Bill of Rights in the next coming months. So, Scott, if you want to come up, I'll just pass this on to you.
Okay, we think we're close enough for government work here. Is that going, Mike's all good? Or the Michael, if you're more formal? Michael phone? Okay, kids. Yeah, 2 semi-tractor trailer accidents on the way down. We were not involved in either one of them. One was at 21st Street in Ogden and one by Lagoon. So, as you might well imagine, this is kind of a comfortable chair.
Nice.
Glad we had it. All right. Okay, so let's tell you why we're here. We have done the Second Amendment, Part 1, previously, but that was a few months ago, and it probably is good for continuity's sake, for context and everything else, to kind of do a very brief review as much as we can. In this particular one, this is a 3-part lesson. If we don't finish it, we'll throw it into the next one when we get together. But I got to say that, they're coming back after the summer. And for me, I was at best a haphazard student, okay? It hit where it hit. And grades, I thought they were just part of the alphabet. And it, an A or B or C or D, it didn't matter. It didn't mean anything to me. So, Delta Force is pretty good anyway. But so I was haphazard. But I'll just tell you, the reason I gave consideration to doing this the way we're doing it is that when I came back to school at the end of the summer, I needed to be broken in again. Putting shoes on was really a chore. My summer was basically cut off jeans, no shirts, no shoes, and it was just, I got a friend that says I was raised by the wolves, but when I had to put a new shirt on with a collar to come in, and then the biggest, hardest part, honestly, aside from sitting at a desk all day long every day, was getting my fingers to go around a pencil. I could not grasp a pencil after the end of the summer. So if you're anything like I was when I was going to school, my hardest grade, by the way, I will say was 6th grade. I mean, all the years I spent in school, and 6th grade, boy, that was a bane to me. So I hope that as we review to give context and kind of get something to all fit together, maybe this will help to do this very quickly. And that's what I hope to do. So this Part 1, historical perspective and the founder's position. We need to really clearly understand this. As was pointed out as we're first getting in here, there's stuff going on right now. I don't care if it's within our own community, within the nation, or internationally. As you point out, this is a big issue. And the context in the historical perspective will go back to England and where they were and where we got our heritage from. Okay, so this right to keep and bear arms, it's not a collective right of the state. We're going to talk about that at some length. It's not just for hunting, shooting, plinking, target practice, collecting, whatever you want to put it. It's not just something that you do if you want to, and it's fun, something to spend your money on if you've got extra money, whatever like that. I got some grandsons right now that I don't know where they get all their money for the ammunition they're using, but at any rate, it is an individual God-given right, and it was an inalienable right. The Founding Fathers knew it and understood it clearly and unequivocally when they put the Second Amendment in. Hopefully you'll see that they came about that feeling very naturally, very, very much from what else does it mean kind of attitude. They really lived it and breathed it, okay? So the Second Amendment didn't create the right to keep and bear arms. It was, all it did was basically vouchsafe that. And we're in a hurry on getting through this particular thing, particularly since I started late. And if I talk like I'm on caffeine, I'm not. But the fact of the matter is that it's still something we, I may probably go faster than what people might be interested in just for the fun of it. But some time ago, I ran for the United States Senate. And I probably told some of you this story before, where the questions came, and each candidate, there were 11 candidates in front of this whole group, about 500, mostly Republican delegates that were being sent to the state convention. But each one of the candidates got a question, got 2 minutes to state their position, and all the candidates got to give a 1 minute response. Then it came back to the original person, and they gave a 1 minute kind of rebuttal of all the other 10 people. I was the last one to be the first one to be asked the question. And so, they'd been through all the other guys. It was they were a broad spectrum of questions, not just on the Second Amendment, obviously. And so I'm sitting there, and they're going through their questions, and the judges are right in front, and I'm going, come on, give me my question. And so they asked me, the question was, did the Second Amendment create an individual right to keep and bear arms? And I took a deep breath and let it pause there for a moment. Then I said no. And you could hear the rumble through the crowd. The pitchforks were being sharpened, and the torches were being lit, and they were ready to tar and feather me. I said, just settle down for a minute. You need to hear the rest of the answer. And this is exactly where it came to. This didn't create the right to keep and bear arms. It predates, the Bill of Rights, Constitution, Declaration of Independence. It's a right granted by our Creator. And every single creation on earth has the right of self-defense. If you're an amoeba, somebody makes an aggressive move on you, you take a defensive position. Nobody pulls out a handgun, no Glocks in the amoeba size. But the fact of the matter is that they still are able to defend them, or seek to defend themselves, okay? It has everything to preserving our freedom from tyranny. That's the bottom line. Life, liberty, and property in the pursuit of happiness. And so when I got done explaining that, the crowd settled down dramatically. But it was interesting to me, they did a straw poll of all of the delegates who were there. There were, like I say, about 500, I think. And there was one Democrat, there was me, and then there were 9 Republicans. And I came in second place. And I guarantee I did not pack the house with my supporters. There just happened to be people that thought, well, maybe, okay. So even though I wasn't of the Republican flavor, of course, certainly not the Democrat flavor, I came in second place to the guy that ultimately got the nomination and the job. But the fact is, it resonated with the people once they took the time to listen. So what we're going to do in this little quick overview before we get into part 2, which is where we really ought to be right now, but since it's been so long since you've been in school and you can't get your fingers around the pencil anymore, we're just kind of doing this to throw it in a whole stream of thought. So it really is as old as history, and we're going to talk about the Middle Ages. And the history thing, we're going to start in the Old Testament times. Then we're going to go into the Middle Ages. Then we're going to go to the free men of England, which aren't too free anymore, as you well imagine, and what their heritage is and what they have lost to date. Then we're going to look at what it was in colonial America, and then we're going to look at a guy that was Italian. He was contemporary with the American founding fathers. Cesare Beccaria wrote some very fascinating and thoughtful, thought-provoking books about not only this topic, but other things about crime and punishment. But he saw what the right to keep and bear arms was about. And we'll just take a quotation from him because he was contemporary to the founders. This was the way people thought 250 years ago, okay? We're going to look at Blackstone's commentaries, who was the tutor, if you will, for the American founding fathers. We're going to look at their Revolutionary War experience. These guys had real world, real life experiences that they based this on. So this thing is as old as history. Let's start right there. We'll go back to the Old Testament times. I'm not going to read everything, but basically the Philistines, when the children of Israel came into the land of Palestine, they were forbidden by the Philistines for having anything that they could make swords or spears out of, okay? They didn't want somebody that was armed in their land, okay? So the Israelites shouldn't have any weapons. So then, and you can go down that everybody down there went into the land of the Philistines to get all of their tools for working the soil sharpened. Anything that you use to do agriculture, they had to go get it sharpened or fixed or made even from the Philistines. So the Philistines had files, and then all of these tools we're talking about here, if you want to talk about it, these are agricultural tools used that could ultimately be, like I said, when those delegates heard how I felt that the Second Amendment didn't create an individual right to keep and bear arms, they were getting their pitchforks sharpened, okay, just like the Israelites were doing here, okay? So this is the pertinent, well, they're all kind of pertinent, it all joins together. So it came to pass in the day of battle that there was neither sword nor spear found in the hand of any of the people that were with Saul and Jonathan, but Saul and Jonathan, his son, there was found. These guys had swords, okay? Can you imagine the whole nation almost being disarmed? Oh, wait a minute, that's where most nations are today. Can you imagine? So Saul and Jonathan had weapons, okay? So here's the definition out of Noah Webster's 1828 dictionary. A share is a blade of a plow. A coulter is an iron of a plow that's on the forepart. You know what an axe is. Chopping tool, okay. Grubbing hoe is a mattock. Goad is a pointy thing to prod the beast to move faster. That's kind of what we need sometimes with some of our representatives. At any rate, these could be used as weapons, and they were used. When things didn't work out right, the people got up in arms and they took a hoe to battle, if that's all they had, or a pokey thing that they kept their animals moving with, okay, a goad. Anyway, so you go back to the Old Testament times and you find out that people are going to remain in charge. They don't want an armed group of people among them, okay? And this goes forward and we'll find out where it fits in modern society. So here's the Middle Ages, just in brief. This guy named Alfred the Great, a magnificent individual. He was, there's so much I wished we could tell you about him. He was the king of the Anglo-Saxons. And all these things that he really did, and he kind of canonized, if you will, common law. The people used common sense. Oh, can you imagine doing that in law? And so the people used, and their judges used common law, and he documented it. Okay, all this kind of stuff goes back to Alfred the Great, and you look how far away that was, 1,200 years ago anyway. But the thing is, in that one part there, no tyrant, he required all of his people to be armed. This was a requirement, and you're going to find this was a requirement when people got to this continent. It was the law that everybody had arms, not just these things, but the means of defense. Okay, yeah. Or I'll show you. No. Anyway, so he got this tradition going in England that everybody was armed. Okay, this was his law. He was no tyrant. He wanted the people to be there to help defend the kingdom, and by nature, they could keep everything in line, okay? So they have this long history of the right to keep and bear arms from Alpha the Great forward. Well, this tradition came forward, and here's the assize of arms in 1181, and you can talk about Henry II that implemented this, and then the English Declaration of Rights in 1689. All of these things was to protect freedom of the people to have arms for their own defense, and it was taken from the Protestants by James II previously. So the James crowd, if you will, like the King James Bible, he was a tyrant. And, you know, he liked his name being up in lights, so they named the Bible after him, and they kept their heads by doing that. Anyway, there were a lot of tyrants that kept trying to mess this up. But some of these things reinstituted, re-implemented, and protected those things ultimately. So when the people came from England to America, they came as English free men. And that, if you read Blackstone, you'll find that he constantly talks about free men. And England was that. And the Americans were loyal subjects to the king. And so they were, shall we say, expecting to be treated like the people in England had their rights. Can you believe that? We came across the big pond, but yeah, we're still Englishmen, and we still have these free rights, okay? So they were free men. So they had this tradition, and under the colonial law in Virginia, travelers were required to be armed. And you can see the date when the law was passed. They were required to target practice on Sundays. Now, a lot of kids would feel pretty good about Sunday coming up if that was the rule nowadays, but you know, oh, you don't do that, God's mad at you for doing. No, come on, people, just settle down. Okay, so they also said that church attendees must be armed. You had to carry in your churches. Can you imagine some churches forbid you to carry? They're a soft target now. And it's a tragic thing. And were something to happen in a church that had that rule, I would recommend that they sue the pants off of the institution that made that rule. But that's another position, and you guys can think that over. But in the old days, in the colonial time, you had to be armed to go to church. Everybody had to have an operational firearm. You couldn't just have an old relic stacked in the corner that didn't have a trigger, or maybe, you know, it just, no. You had to have an operational firearm, okay? If you didn't have one, the government would provide you one, and you could pay for it later. They were serious about this assumption that everybody would be armed. Now, people say, oh, no, it was a rough and tumble world back in then, and you were expected to do your part. Well, go to Detroit and tell me how things work out. Chicago, go to Salt Lake City. I mean, come on. These guys, I know they're pretty shady characters, aren't they? No, I knew you weren't meaning them. Absolutely. The point of the matter is that almost everywhere you go, if you get in a situation where you need to respond, it will be the most stressful seconds of your life. And whether you make it through or don't depends upon your ability to respond. And so I don't care where you are. You go out this door and somebody's waiting there, it's going to be, well, you know, it'll be stressful. And I guarantee, and there's no way to describe it until you've actually experienced it. So let's go to the colonial law in Massachusetts. All were required to be armed or be fined. I mean, they took away your birthday or whatever they did in those days if you didn't have a firearm. They were serious, and wow, things changed, okay? So, again, Declaration of Independence, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. They're endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, okay? Secure those rights, governments are instituted. Those rights are to be protected by your government, not taken from you by your government. That is absolutely, it's the antithesis of what's happening today, okay? Now, lest you think that we are without risk in our today's world in 2025, your current president has been vocal about red flag laws. And what you have with the red flag law is you get an ex parte hearing. What that means is you are not represented. You don't have you aren't there. You don't even know what's happening normally. Somebody makes a plea before a judge and says this individual is somebody that shouldn't have firearms, whatever their excuse is, the judge issues a declaration that your firearms can be seized. And so they show up at 3, 4, 5, 6 o'clock in the morning when you're in your jammies normally, and they come to the door and they go to seize your firearms. People have been killed because they say, the heck you say, you can't take these. But your current president has expressed, your current attorney general supports that. And it is a real world kind of situation where this is highly concerning. So governments now, oh, and by the way, your current president, Donald Trump, says, we'll worry about due process later. That's the antithesis. That's the opposite of the American formula for liberty. Okay, so at least at one time Americans thought that the primary purpose of government was to secure your God-given rights. Okay, and you'll see very shortly that they had a pretty strong opinion about that. Okay, here's the Italian guy I told you about that was a contemporary, didn't live in America, but he was a jurist, a philosopher, a politician, and he wrote a treatise called On Crimes and Punishment in 1764. Here's one of the quotations that he gave. He says, the laws that forbid the carrying of arms disarm only those only, who are neither inclined nor determined to commit crimes. Such laws make things worse for the assaulted and better for the assailants. They serve rather to encourage than to prevent homicides, for an unarmed man may be attacked with greater confidence than an armed man. Does America believe this anymore? Most obviously not. You call 911, hope they get there in time to wipe the blood up and maybe write the report. I don't know. At one point in an assignment I had at a university, our president did not want anybody to be carrying. And he it's an unwritten rule, even though it's the law in your state that you can carry, he didn't want it. Okay? So these people in high places, and I called our chief of police and I said to him, how soon could you be here if I needed you here if there was a shooter in my office? 5 minutes. I says, how many times do you think he could reload in that time? And it was kind of like end of discussion. If you can't make an immediate response, I mean, you have at most seconds to respond in this highly stressful situation. And, oh yeah, the police will be there to protect you. And it's a facade when you stop and talk to the people that actually are going to do the protecting. They have no legal responsibility to protect you. They really will ultimately and finally write the report, and somebody else pays the undertaker. At any rate, so that's they've forgotten this truism. Blackstone, they came out 1765 through 69 in England, and they were promptly imported to North America. Every one of the American founding fathers, all of them, studied these books intensively. I was going to bring some tonight, but I thought, oh, why? You know, I mean, I can hold them up. You're going to go buy your own anyway if you're going to, right? Or somebody will steal them. I've had people steal them before, literally. When I'm not looking, I'm talking to somebody after a presentation, I turn around and my books are gone. They must have needed them more than I did, you know. I've lost hundreds of dollars of books that way. So it's not like I don't trust you guys, but maybe somebody will come in off the street. It is. Yeah. They needed it more than I did, you know. Okay. It's kind of like stealing scriptures. I mean, you know, it's like, oh, yeah. Well, I hope they read them, you know. Okay, fine. So anyway, these commentaries on the law, they really are, if you can get Blackstone's writings and read them, you will find in those books things. I hope it wasn't our car that's starting to beep right now. Might want to peek out and look. Obviously, our car is the one they'd steal. No, I'm kidding. Anyway, you will find as you read Blackstone phrases that are incorporated right into the American founding documents, right word for word. Oh, Blackstone said that, if you're familiar with them, and it's here. It's right there in our founding enabling documents. Same with Montesquieu, same with Locke, and certainly the concepts out of the scriptures. Those are the four principal sources of the things that the Americans relied on to write their originating documents. So get them and read them. I think you'll cheer all the way through. Get the originals because you'll read them in the Old English, which has the strange writing. The S's look like F's oftentimes. I mean, you almost read in a foreign language when you do it, but you get the hang of it pretty quickly. It's really fun. So here's what Blackstone wrote. Self-defense is justly called the primary law of nature. So it is not, neither can it be in fact taken away by the laws of society. This is interesting. So they bought into this thing, and it became the heritage that they brought into the American Revolutionary War. So here's the tyrants normally seek to disarm and subjugate. They brought these natural laws with them to this country, but as tensions increased, now think about this for a second in a modern context. As things become more progressive, I mean, you know what that is. I mean, it's communist. I mean, people don't call themselves communists, and they rarely call themselves socialists, but they do sometimes. Now they're progressives. Oh, are you progressive in your attitude? Oh, yeah, of course I am. What that normally means is you're ready to take away our God-given rights, but we won't get into that discussion right now because we're in a hurry. But as things got more and more tense in the 1770s, the British tried to control manufacture and importation of powder. You can't use a firearm if you don't have powder. Now, has the Obama administration, oh, dang it, I gave away it. That's been a recent problem that we had when Obama tried to prevent hand loading of firearms. It almost was like you had to build a bunker in order to be able to go hand load your own ammunition. And of course, it got set aside because some people got a little upset about that and made a big enough stink that the ATF backed off. But think about this in the 1770s. They were preventing powder from being manufactured or imported. Okay, they restricted the amount you could have. And they says, okay, now, here, what's the minimal amount you can get by? How many deer have you got to kill every year? You know, if any of you fire black powder rifles, they're some of the funnest things. I know I took my dad one time out to shoot some black powder stuff. And, you know, it's kind of like when you're with a beginner, you're loading every 2 or 3 minutes is about all you can do. He's worried about somebody skulking in through the brush to get you while you're reloading your black powder rifle. My dad, he said it was the most fun he's ever had shooting in his life. So even people that have been around shooting all their lives, he thought it was pretty cool. But it doesn't take much powder to load a rifle to take a deer. One shot, one kill kind of thing. So how much do you need all year long? Oh, you can get by with one horn of powder in your household? Okay, you can have that. But if you're in a combat situation, you run out of that pretty fast. Okay, so by the way, I hadn't thought about doing this, and since I've got so much time, I'll just tell you a really quick story. One, and you can get this on YouTube. It's called April Morning. It's got Tommy Lee Jones in it and some other big names. I mean, you know, big movie stars. It's not like it was a haphazardly thrown together, no-name kind of thing where it was like a church roadshow thing. They really did some real, I mean, it was acting. April Morning was Howard Fast put the book together, and it was supposed to be an anti-war book, but it became, to me, a review of the cost of liberty. And it's set on April Morning, April 19th, 1776, 75, when the Redcoats came into town, and brave men stood on the green, and brave men got shot down. And the dad, Tommy Lee Jones, I don't want to ruin your story, but you know, he's got his son that's like 14 years old, if I recall correctly, that's there with him, and the dad gets shot down. Okay, the boy has a baptism of fire. First terror, you know, first blood, first shots, you know, panic. But then he spent the rest of the day chasing the Brits back to Boston. And when he got home, his dad was laying on his bed, dead, okay? The price was, you didn't send him to Dover where they dressed the body up and sent him home in a nice casket with a flag on it. They took him home to their families. And I've got accounts that talk about these men that were picked up in carts and their legs were hanging out in homespun stockings. Their wives or mothers were probably up late at night during the winter, knitting these stockings for them, those wool stockings. I mean, it was a very homey but tragic kind of thing where the price of liberty was very well told. I recommend the story. I don't know how many times I've showed it to young people. In fact, we ought to go home and watch it. Not tonight. It'll be too late. But at any rate, I recommend it because there is some heart in it, and you come to understand and feel better. But why we're going to talk about this, but the Brits came out to Lexington and Concord to pick up the ball and powder. They were taking the ammunition, and they were going to capture Sam Adams and John Hancock in the process because they thought they were the rabble-rousers. But here's what was happening in the 1770s. They were trying to keep them from being able to have the means of firing their firearms. Okay, so it was, you take away the ammunition, you're going to find that well, I won't talk about it much, but just think for a minute. Some of the laws that have been passed, I think it's coming up in the next presentation, which will be in a few minutes. Some of the laws that were passed, you had to register not just firearms, but ammunition purchases. That is currently not in the situation that we're in. But if you went in, you had to, if you want 22 rounds that I used to buy by the quart when I was a kid, you had to register that you had bought ammunition. Really egregious kinds of things. You need to understand that what the Brits were doing is exactly what our nation is doing right now. Okay, so in Massachusetts in 1774, Gage had his troops seize a large cache of gunpowder. In Virginia, Lord Dunmore confiscated the colonists' store of gunpowder, and he also disabled their guns in their town magazine, which is where they stored their militia firearms in case somebody had to go grab a gun and go to battle against the bad guys. So he disabled the firearms, so they couldn't even use them. They make a good club, I guess. You can put something on the pointy end and stab people with it. But they took that away from Americans for quite a while too, if that was to be the case. In light of all these things, there were men that set up committees of correspondence. And this is something that goes right with our time today. See, they didn't have the internet. They didn't have online things you could do, review in class and all that kind of stuff. But the people needed to know what the king's men were doing to them. So these individuals, they would write letters back and forth between the colonies. They told each other what was going on in their neck of the woods. Then they went out and they talked in the little villages and townships about the egregious things that were going on. And so guys like this Paul Revere guy that I've got right here, they went out through all the villages and townships, and they met in taverns and churches and wherever they could, and they gathered and they talked about these things that were happening. And so I got this picture here because it wasn't just Paul Revere that made his ride. There was a number of other people that did so also. And so don't get the idea, I'm just saying Paul Revere was the only guy that went out crying. The redcoats were coming. And he didn't say the British are coming because they were all British. Everybody always thought they were British, okay? So anyway, when Paul Revere or the others came into their township, coming through saying, hey, the redcoats are coming, they recognized that voice because they'd been listening in the taverns to the story that had to be told. And consequently, the people got out of bed, grabbed their muskets and powder, some ball, and if they were smart, they put some water and a little bread in the bag or something like that, got dressed and went out on the green to meet them. But that's what happened, was that there were people giving the voice of warning. All too often, we no longer even believe in this. I mean, our people don't even try to educate themselves as to the difficulties and challenges that are in our current society. So what happened April 19th, 1775? The redcoats marched to Lexington and Concord. Why did they do that? I already said that. It was to get the powder and ball and to arrest Sam Adams and John Hancock. So those that are tyrants are well aware of the danger of an armed citizenry. It makes it really hard for them to go out and work their will on you, okay? So let's look what the American Founding Fathers said about this right to keep and bear arms. Here's the guy that they call the father of the Constitution. We wouldn't have had probably a Constitution without some key individuals. George Washington obviously was one. If he hadn't been the president of the convention, if he had not been present to be elected president of the convention, people would have said, I ain't going to trust those guys. I mean, look at the trouble they had anyway when guys like Patrick Henry said, are you sure you want a government that strong? You know, they had all this stuff about the anti-federalist papers and all that kind of stuff. James Madison was another guy. He really took the good notes of the convention. He was the guy that was an instigator, facilitator. Thomas Jefferson and he collaborated, even though Jefferson was in France as our ambassador. But at any rate, afterwards, in Federalist 46, James Madison, he and Hamilton and Jay wrote the Federalist Papers to convince people to ratify the Constitution. Here's what he said in Federalist 46, so you can look that up. The Constitution preserves the advantage of being armed, which Americans possess over the people of almost every other nation where the governments are afraid to trust people with arms. Okay, so this armed citizenry, he said, this is one advantage we have over everybody. Okay, he also said, by the way, after the convention and the ratification of the Constitution, he was elected to the House of Representatives. So on the floor of the House, he was involved in writing the Second Amendment. Him and George Mason were the principal authors of what became the Second Amendment. Actually, it was the Fourth Amendment that they passed on to the citizens. The first two were not ratified. The next 10 were, but in sequence, it was the fourth one that was in there. So just in case you hear these scurrilous rumors, that's what it is. Okay. So this is what he said on the floor of Congress. And you can see the references on all of these things if you want to go look them up yourself. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. A well-regulated militia composed of the body of the people, trained to arms, is the best and most natural defense of a free people. The body of the people. We're going to talk about people versus state in the not too distant future if I can keep my mouth moving today. Okay, so Henry Lee, another one of the great American founding fathers, we're talking about the Declaration, the Articles of Confederation, President of the Congress of the Confederation, a senator. So he's what he said. Whereas to preserve liberty, it is essential that the whole body of the people always possess arms. The whole body of the people, can you imagine? And be taught alike, especially when young, how to use them. Okay, in a short period of time this evening, you're going to see how widely considered that was. Okay, here's Patrick Henry. The great object is that every man be armed. Everyone who is able may have a gun. Okay, here's what Thomas Jefferson, no free men shall be ever debarred the use of arms. Sam Adams said the Constitution shall never be construed to prevent the people of the United States who are peaceable citizens from keeping their own arms. This was a universal position of the American founders. Here's George Mason. He with Madison were the principal authors of the Second Amendment. This is an important thing. The militia is not the National Guard. Okay, that predates. I mean, that didn't come around until like 1903. The National Guard. So the militia, he says. I ask, sir, what is the militia? And of course, we're going to read the Second Amendment again shortly. What is the militia? He asks. It is the whole people, except for a few public officials. I don't want to be one of those public officials. I want to be the whole people. Okay, so the militia was well understood to be the people. We're going to get into that in a while. Here's Noah Webster, again, one of the founding fathers. He was in Philadelphia at the time of the convention, but he didn't attend. He had sometimes the founding fathers over for dinner and stuff like that. But he said, before a standing army or a tyrannical government can rule, the people must be disarmed, as they are in almost every kingdom in Europe. The supreme power in America cannot enforce unjust laws by the sword, because the whole body of the people are armed and constitute a force superior to any band of regular or professional troops that can be on any pretense raised in the United States. So how many people are supposed to have guns? Everybody. Everybody's supposed to know how to use them, and that's why an army can't take the nation. Okay, here's St. George Tucker. I was going to bring his book too, but again, I used to carry a trunk, and I'd bring in a whole traveling trunk with recommended books when I taught, but you guys can look this up on your own. You don't need me to bring them. The internet works for everybody. Okay, so St. George Tucker, I always introduce him as one of the principal founding fathers. He was probably the preeminent founding father of the founding era in constitutional stuff. He personally rewrote all of Virginia's laws after we became independent from England because they had been written to conform to English law. So he personally rewrote all of the Virginian laws. Very bright guy. Okay, and I define palladium in here. This may be considered the true palladium of liberty, which is defined as something that affords effectual defense, protection, and safety. So it's the protector of liberty. The right of self-defense is the first law of nature. In most governments, oh, wait a minute, where did he find that? Oh, he found that in Blackstone, by the way. In most governments, it has been the study of rulers to confine this right within the narrowest possible limits. Whenever standing armies are kept up, that's why they wrote in about standing armies, you know, in the Constitution, the right of the people to keep and bear arms is under any color or pretext whatsoever prohibited. Liberty, if not already annihilated, is on the brink of destruction. We're going to review this quotation later. It's so important. In England, the people have been disarmed, generally, under the specious pretext of preserving the game. What's that? We got to make sure you guys have got animals out there to hunt. If you want to hunt deer, you want to hunt birds, we got to limit people being armed because that's going to, you know, if everybody had guns, by golly, the deer would be wiped out. You know, Robin Hood, you know, King John, all that kind of stuff. Remember that story? The king's deer. Under the specious pretext of preserving game, a never failing lure to bring over the landed aristocracy. Well, by golly, with those unwashed masses, I mean, they can't be out here hunting on my land, by golly. So the people that held land were in favor of it because that's the way it was sold to them. Everything's sold on a spin. Okay, the landed aristocracy to support any measure under the mast, though calculated for very different purposes. True it is, their Bill of Rights seems at first view to counteract this policy, but the right of bearing arms is confined to Protestants. That's another interesting thing. They had a religious discrimination kind of thing. If you're a Catholic, by golly, you better not be asking to carry a gun. This happened to the Jews in Germany, didn't it? Anyway, we'll see that at some point here too. We're going to look at the 1938 German gun laws. The words suitable to their condition and degree have been interpreted to authorize the prohibition of keeping a gun or other engine for the destruction of game to any farmer or inferior tradesman or other person not qualified to kill game. Well, by golly, you got to be an aristocrat to know how to go out and shoot, you know, deer. So that not one man in 500 can keep a gun in his house without being subject to a penalty. So they've written their laws in such a manner that, but, you know, one man in 500, that's a very small percentage of the people, okay? So in the preamble to the to the Bill of Rights, it states specifically that they were trying to prevent misconstruction or abuse of the general government's powers, and they added further declaratory and restrictive clauses to the Constitution. So these things were there to prevent the government from encroaching on other things. That's why they did that. This is in the preamble of the Bill of Rights. And you can go read that. Most people don't know there's a preamble to the Bill of Rights, but there is. And they said they did it to prevent the general government from misconstruing and saying, oh, we've got the power to do whatever we want. It's the elastic clause, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 18. Baloney, go read that too. All it does is grant power to carry out the powers granted. Okay, go read that one too. They lie about that also. And everybody goes, oh, the elastic clause. Oh, we all obviously know this. Or the penumbra of the Constitution. A penumbra is the shadowy pretext that really doesn't exist in an eclipse. Okay, so, but they use big terms and they make you feel like you're an idiot. You know, the emperor does have new clothes, in case you didn't notice. And so they deceive everybody by using these deceptive concepts. Okay, so the Bill of Rights didn't create rights. It canonized those rights to prevent government from abusing those rights. So here's the Second Amendment. It says a well-regulated militia, who is everybody, being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. What does not be infringed mean? You can't interfere with it. Okay. So I'm going to make mention of a little something that is of a historical note. I mean, I always like to throw these in. Many of the detractors of original intent attempt to twist this original intent to fit their definition that more fully and completely restricts the right to keep and bear arms. So that's what they're trying to do with this. The argument proposes that the placement of 3 commas found in the original published versions indicates some perverse interpretation that takes away the right to keep and bear arms from the people, and it makes it a collective right of the state. Okay, the rules of commas weren't nearly so hard and fast as they are today, and after the Bill of Rights came on board, Noah Webster Americanized the standard spelling and punctuation rules for the nation. Okay, prior to that time, commas were placed to kind of note a kind of rhetorical pause or emphasis. You know, we speak sometimes in a phraseology or give you a chance to let the words sink in. So they salted these commas into a lot of their writings that they wouldn't do today because they didn't have a standardized acceptance of how commas were used. So it's interesting that the amendment passed by Congress in September of 1789 had 3 commas. A well-regulated militia, by the way, I like the other one I'm going to give after this better. A well-regulated militia, comma, being necessary for the security of a free state, comma, the right of the people to keep and bear arms, comma, shall not be infringed. Okay, now you're going to, those people that look at the rhetorical use of commas and the original writings and the English use of punctuation nowadays have all said, what I just read to you does not mean anything any different from what I'm going to read to you in just a minute. Moments, I guess I should say. So they've all resolved all this kind of stuff. But some people say, oh, look at those commas. They got to mean something. I guess it doesn't mean that people can have arms. Okay, so that amendment I just read to you was distributed to the states after it got passed by Congress, which was the 26th of September, 1789. And the states ratified in 1791 one with 1 comma. So Congress passed this, oh my goodness, it must not really be there. They ratified this one, oh my goodness, they don't match, it doesn't apply. So here's the 1 comma. I like this one better. And so did St. George Tucker, by the way. He might have influenced my opinion. But at any rate, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, comma, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. I like that one better. It just kind of flows, okay? So Tucker only uses 1 comma in his writings about the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. Both are officially used. They're both across the country, and they're both in all of the official writings of the government and everything like that. And historical experts have said, it's okay. Don't worry about it, people. Okay, it doesn't affect the meaning. And that is an individual right protected by the Second Amendment. Okay, so what we also have the written and spoken testimonies of the American founding fathers regarding the true purpose of the Second Amendment. So it was their original intent that the Second Amendment of the United States Constitution unequivocally protected individual God-given rights of all mankind to keep and protect and to bear arms to protect life, liberty, and property from tyrants, criminals, in both foreign and domestic. It's not just there to target practice or to hunt or to plink or to whatever, collect. This is there for their specific purposes that they say. It's a right that must not be infringed. It says the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Shall is an imperative. You cannot cross that. Okay, so it's in grave danger in America today because of a lack of understanding of the true purpose. And Hosea said, my people are destroyed for the lack of knowledge. Isaiah wrote something similar. My people are gone into captivity because they have no knowledge, and their honorable men are famished. So I think that honorable men could be men that are in positions of honor or authority or whatever. Obviously, in today's world, these guys are starving to death in terms of principle, so they're famished. Okay. So here's what Jefferson said: a nation expects to be ignorant and free. It expects what never was and never will be. So if we expect to continue to be ignorant and free, we're going to lose our liberty. That's the state of the affairs in America today. Okay, so this coming up one, which will be in mere moments, is part 2. So I know it was like a 45-minute review of part one, which we covered in about 2 hours last time. But you got to get your fingers around the pencil again to put everything in context so you haven't forgotten how to write before I go on to that. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to shrink this guy down. I'm going to put this guy down. I'm going to bring up, I think it's this one. Nope, that's part one. We just did that one. Okay, that's not the one we want. I'm almost there, guys. Please forgive me. Yeah.
She's very worried. I'm not worried.
Okay, let's take a vote.
It's 1-1.
Who's worried? Not me, because there's part three. We're going to do this again another time. Trust me. These were at one point in sequence.
Right.
What's getting revenge? That's never happened before. What angry bit shoot guy? I don't think so. Okay, so this is okay. This is part two. I told you I had it up here. You guys didn't believe me. You were losing faith though, I could tell. Okay, so what we're going to talk about in this is the evolution. And like I say, we'll get through this as far as we do in the next 45 or 50 minutes. And we'll save what we got until the next time we get together for part three, because we do have a part three. And hopefully it will come together so that it makes some sense to you. Okay, we're going to talk about the falsehoods that become law. We're going to talk about global examples of how dangerous it is when we get disarmed, and some of the modern perversions of this God-given right. Okay, so that's where we are at this moment. Okay, so there's this fearful attitude toward firearms, that students and guns can never be safely mixed. And we have these mass shootings to prove that, don't we? By the way, I did a couple of hours on radio this morning, and I talked at some length, and I did it last night because I did a webinar. We talked at some length about the SSRIs, the selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, these depression medicines. And if we ever can get a full measure of understanding, we will come to understand that I would venture to 99% of those mass shooters are on these drugs. They've done a fairly good job of keeping that information from people, you know, and the rights of their privacy of their medical records and so on. But in every single instance that we know of where there has been mass shootings, the perpetrators have been on these SSRI type drugs. These drugs that are depression type drugs that alter your state of mind and and literally facilitate and encourage. And now I've had a lot of examples that I didn't put in here because there wasn't time, where they literally feel like that they were almost possessed, that they had to kill their grandparents or whatever. They got up at night. One kid that I done some research on got a .410 shotgun, and his grandma and grandpa were taking care of him, and he just felt like he had to go do it. And he says it was like watching a movie that you knew the outcome, you couldn't change it, and he just had to go kill his grandma and grandpa. So he shot him with his .410 shotgun. So these people with these SSRIs, in fact, 11 years ago, at the request of a national party, they asked me to write a resolution regarding their position on SSRIs and how dangerous they were and how they needed to be basically re-regulated and taken off the market if possible. So at any rate, but all of that said, I'm not going to really spend a lot of time on that, but you do your research, you will find, in fact, Tucker Carlson just recently did a about an hour and 45-minute interview with a psychiatrist about SSRIs. And oddly enough, he came to the conclusion that I did when I wrote that resolution 11 years ago. But that's why you can't safely mix these things. It's because we're putting people in an altered state of mind. And a lot of people say, oh, you are somehow impinging upon people that you're accusing of being mentally deficient or something like that. And so they put it in a context of, how shall I say, a chemical imbalance. And so we can correct that with medications. We're going to do it. But this psychiatrist gives a very disheartening view of what these people, what they really do with some of these things. It's very sad and tragic. And so there's this fearful attitude that has come into America, and steps are being taken to disarm the nation. So, well, I just wanted to start off this part 2, which we're already an hour into because of where we left off. This is a council. Thomas Jefferson was in Paris as the American ambassador. His nephew was Peter Carr. And he wrote in this magnificent letter. Very often I take it and, you can make your typescript look like kind of handwriting and everything. I put it on parchment paper, I roll it up, and I wrap a ribbon around it, and I give it to young people when I'm first. And it doesn't just talk about Second Amendment and right to keep and bear arms. It talks about study habits. It talks about morality, principles that life can be lived on. It's a very fascinating letter. And in fact, if we had time tonight, I'd read it to you before you go home, because you need to give consideration to it. But I give it to almost every student that I've taught over the last 30 years, because I think it's that important. And to me, it was like, the first time I read this, it's in volume 5 of the writings of Thomas Jefferson. First time I read this, I went, yes, I did something right growing up. I told you I was a kind of a haphazard student, but I grew up with a gun in my hands. Every hour that I wasn't in school, or asleep, I guess I could say, I was out with a gun in my hands. That doesn't mean I was a murderous, homicidal maniac, but just you're going to have to read I'll just read it to you, what Jefferson said. He talked about, it was morality, it was honesty, it was virtue, it was study guide about what he needed to read. And he gives them the books. Most Americans can't pronounce the names of the books, but he wants you to read them. And then on top of that, he says, oh, by the way, read them in the original language. So if it was originally written in Greek, read it in Greek. It's Greek to me. Okay. I have trouble enough with English, but these were not country bumpkins. And his advice to Peter Carr was very good counsel, I think. I'm spending way too much time on it. So I'm just going to focus on this little piece where he writes about exercise. He says, consider what hours you have free from the school and the exercises of the school. Give about 2 of them every day to exercise. I like that idea. A couple of hours exercise. Can't do you that much bad. Okay, for health must not be sacrificed to learning. A strong body makes the mind strong. As to the species of exercise, I advise the gun. That put a big smile on my face when I first read this years and years ago. While this gives a moderate exercise to the body, it gives boldness, enterprise, and independence to the mind. Games played with the ball and others of that nature are too violent for the body and stamp no character on the mind. Let your gun, therefore, be the constant companion of your walks. I mean, whoa, doggies. This is kind of hearkening back to what the American colonial people believed to begin with. I started shooting when I was 4 years old. I've still got the gun. It's a little 410 that's just perfect for a little kid to shoot. Very lightweight. 410 ammunition's quite expensive now. I've just been looking at it lately, so some of my grandchildren can have that fun that I had beginning at age 4. But at any rate, by the time I was probably 18, I think I had 20,000 trigger pulls. I mean, I was a rabid shooter, but I wasn't, rabid in the sense that you think about rabies. Okay, anyway, so that was Jefferson's advice. Exercise a couple hours a day, but take a hike with your gun. And he went on to say, don't take a book with you. Don't worry about that. that, just go and observe God's creation. He didn't quite put it in that context, but that's when you're, let your gun therefore be the constant companion of your walks. So that's so far removed from what many of us grew up like. We regularly brought guns to school. I did. You know what? We didn't shoot anybody at school. I mean, it's absolutely astounding to most people today to think that this could have been possible. Some of the kids, like me, put them in their locker. Other kids put them in the principal's office. You know, let them watch it. I'd rather watch my own, thank you very much. Okay, but we were able, maybe going to a morning duck hunt, or we were going to go rabbit hunting right after school. That was our way of, we just did it. In fact, I'll give you a little quick story. A friend of mine brought a handgun to school one day to sell to another student. And he's standing at the locker and they're looking at this gun, you know, and teacher walks up and says, "What's going on?" And he says, "I'm thinking about selling him this gun." The teacher says, "Let me see it." So he handles it, looks at it. He says to the kid, "Are you going to buy it?" He says, "I haven't decided yet." And the teacher says, "Well, if you don't, I am." I mean, there was none of this federal offense kind of nonsense that goes on today. I mean, these were real people I knew. This was the way it was in my youth growing up. Now, I've got a gray beard and people think that was a long, long time ago, but it wasn't that long ago, okay? You got a gray beard too. I don't know how you got it so young. Okay,
Thanks.
many schools had shooting ranges in them, mine included. And you could go after school and shoot. And here's some old pictures of high school images from yesteryear. You know what? Boy, I wished you had told me that 6 or 8 slides ago. Let me see what I'm supposed to be doing here, because I'm absolutely positive that I goofed up. It's not your fault, you guys. There we go. Are you there?
There we go. High school images of yesteryear.
Yeah. How about that, sports fans? Thanks for pointing that out. Okay, we got to start over tonight. Oh, just keep going? Okay, all right. Anyway, okay, this is high school yearbook stuff, okay? This is real world stuff. I mean, look at that. There's boys and girls rifle clubs. There's a girls rifle club. There's a boys rifle club. I mean, if you want to be with the girls, you went in that other club. I mean, that was just the way it was, okay? So that was tradition. That was the way it was when I was in school. And nobody brought the guns to school to shoot their classmates or their teachers. Maybe their principal someday. It crossed their mind, but I'm sure it didn't happen. Because everybody was scared to death of the principal, because they had these paddles that were about this big with holes drilled in them and a handle on them, and holy cow. You had trouble sitting down afterwards. But anyway, I digress. But that's the way it was. Why isn't it that today? I think SSRI drugs have scared everybody away from that. But anyway, so the intent of the Second Amendment was to protect the right to keep and bear arms. Okay, again, this is the preamble to the Bill of Rights. They were trying to prevent a misunderstanding where the government felt, because of this, I can take, because of the way this Constitution is written. And let's just take the concept of juries, for example. That was one of the concerns Jefferson had, that the jury was not well enough protected in the Constitution. Yeah, it's in Article 3 of the Constitution. It says that that's how we're going to do business. And he said, it needs to be better. And so that was one of the things that we protected in 3 amendments, the right of the jury, okay, and the protective right of the jury. In fact, if the Founding Fathers had a bias in terms of accusations made against people, it was biased in favor of the defendant. They would much rather a guilty person go free than an innocent person be punished improperly. So they biased the whole system. That's flipped on its head today, the way they do business today. The judge and the prosecutor very often collaborate with legalese and nonsense. I'll just give you one example of a trial. I attended the entire trial, sat in the peanut gallery and listened. I wasn't anything but an observer. And that, in that case, I had read the law that the defendant was accused of violating. The law was absolute gibberish written by the Utah legislature. It was nonsense. It was Bravo Sierra in the nth degree. Okay. So I was sitting there thinking, how can they convict anybody on this law? It's beyond understanding. It's written in such ethereal gibberish that no, the person that was accused it could be easily seen how they considered the law and how they were being accused of violating it. I wanted to see how that was going to be handled in the trial. And so I sat through the entire trial. And when the defense attorney wanted to read the law in the presence of the jury, the prosecuting attorney, I mean, it was like a rocket was on his behind, and he stood up so fast and he objected and immediately started agitating the judge about it and everything like that. And what it came to be was the judge said, I will tell the jury what it means, and they will make their judgment based upon my interpretation of that law. The prosecuting attorney sat down very convinced, and I knew some of the people on the jury. I mean, happenstantially. I mean, when I'm sitting there, I'm going, oh, I know, you know. Anyway, the jury they had more intelligence than a box of rocks, I'm pretty sure, because I knew some of them, but they didn't have any idea what the law said. And when the judge gave them their charge and had them understand the law the way he wanted them to understand it, they brought back a guilty verdict. Now, to me, if I had been on the jury, here's what I would have done. I would have, when we got, out of the case and we were sitting in our little jury room, I'd have, played the Columbo trick, like, I'm very interested as to what that law says. I'm going to send a note out to the judge that we would like to have the law to read in the jury room. And if the judge forbade that, I would write a note back out, then we're going to have a hung jury. Because you're going to have at least one member of the jury, meaning me, that will not convict because there's a lack of understanding. And I would have kind of pushed the point that way, being a member of the jury, and they would have got a hung jury at the very least. And if they gave us the law, we could have read it in there, and it would have been like 12 Angry Men, if you haven't seen that old movie, okay? Anyway, the jury would have gone, are you kidding me? This is what they're trying to bring. And it would have gone a lot differently, but it didn't go that way, and there was a conviction and a sentencing, okay? So that was the antithesis of the way the American founding fathers wanted to handle things. And again, the Bill of Rights preamble, I bring it up again here, they don't want any misunderstandings. They don't want a power to be abused by the general government. And so they put further restrictive clauses in. That's what the Bill of Rights is. It further restricts the power of the national, general, federal. A lot of people use different terms. I like general because if you read the 39th Federalist paper, you'll find that it's not a general government, it's not a federal government, and it is not a national government. It's partially national, it's partially federal, and those definition of terms elude most people, but it's a blend of those things. Some things it's national, meaning that the general government has full control over this, okay? Treaties, war, all that that's all into the hands of the national government. The federal government, there's a partnership with the other confederation, if you will, members that are separate republics in the states, okay? So it's a general government, it's not a national government, and it's not a federal government. It's a blend of that. And the 39th Federalist paper makes that point. Go read it. Okay, so here is again, and you'll see there's only one comma in this because that's my preference. A well-regulated militia, which we all know now is everybody, being necessary to the security of a free state. It's not a National Guard or anything like that. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Shall not be infringed means you can't interfere with it. Okay, now we're going to talk about the people having this right. Okay, so this is important because there's a distinction that some people are saying, no, by the people they mean a collective right. Okay, so let's get into that. Is it a collective right of the state? That's what some would have us believe. It actually says the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be interfered with. That's what infringed makes, okay? So, maybe that ought to be understood, the right of the state, meaning it's the right of the state. It's a collective right. There's people in the state, isn't there? I'm going to use an example in a recent Utah perversion of this, because our legislature always tries to go to the collective, and they're wrong. But this is what they have done with our water rights, and I use this as an example, and that's why a water rights thing isn't a Second Amendment thing, which may come to a Second Amendment thing someday. I think it was Mark Twain, I think, that said, whiskey's for drinking, water's for fighting. Anyway, someday it may come to that. And that's kind of what people ought to think. When I bought ground in the area we're in now, I talked to an old farmer asking him if he had any grounds to sell, and he told me no, he was saving it for his family, blah, blah, blah. But what he did was he put his finger up in my face and he said, well, let me tell you something, son. If you buy ground in this valley without water, you're a fool. No, he said, you're a damned fool. That's what he said. So anyway, I said, yes, sir, I thank you for your advice, and that's what I did. I bought my water right. It's a private property right. Now, I'm getting far afield, but you'll see why this is similar to how we need to understand the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Because right now, there are people in this nation that try and say, oh, this right of the people is a collective right, which because there's people in the state, that means the state, okay? Now, Utah's legislature uses this kind of logic all the time, and I'm doing this because it's this, okay? So the right of the state to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Now, you're going to see that's a Soviet-style constitution, and we're going to refer to the Iraq Constitution written in 2005 soon. Okay, so if this interpretation were valid, you could replace the word people with the word state, couldn't you? I mean, if it really meant the state, you could put it in there and it'd make sense to you. So the First Amendment currently reads, the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for redress of grievance. The right of the people, okay? Well, let's just put state in there, see how it reads. The right of the state peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for redress of grievances. That's a whole bunch of inconsistencies that just plain don't make any sense. So that's the First Amendment. If we took this collectivist viewpoint, that because there are people in the state is the one that's in control of this, the state being that government agency that's in charge of our lives, right? Okay, so let's try and put it in the Fourth Amendment. It correctly currently reads, the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated. That makes perfect sense to me, but let's try it with this collectivist view. The right of the state to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated. Right now, currently in the state of Utah, our lieutenant governor is protecting the right of them to protect us from being able to see what's in the person's papers and everything else like that they've been hiding from us to hold false elections. That is not a collective right of the state. It is a right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects, okay? So can you see how foolish it is to try and replace people with state in the Second Amendment, okay? It's a big perversion of what the Bill of Rights actually says. So the Bill of Rights did not create rights for the newly created national government. It was restrictions on the national government, the federal government, the general government, however you want to take it. Okay, so it protected pre-existing, that came along before the Bill of Rights, the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence. It predated kings, presidents, potentates, and popes, everybody, because this is a natural God-given right, the rights of the people of the nation. So let's look at the Iraq Constitution for just a second. You know, when Saddam Hussein got, I keep calling him Saddam Hussein, and maybe there's some correlation, a Freudian slip there. But when Hussein was overthrown at the behest of the American military, which is another discussion we could have about the violations of constitutions and so on and so forth in there, What happened was they said, now you got rid of this turkey named Hussein, you got to write a constitution. So the American government helped them write a constitution in 2005. As soon as it was written, I got 2 translations. I don't speak Arabic or write it or read it or understand it. I mean, I don't have any of those skills. So I thought, there's a lot of things that happen with interpretation. So you get little minor nuances when you have an interpretation. So I got 2 copies of translations into English, and I studied them. I went through them line by line, comparing and all that kind of stuff. What I found that we had helped them write a Soviet-style constitution. We helped them write one. Now, there's a little side trip we have to take for this for just a moment. That's the best we could do, apparently. And there are people today that are attempting to get a new constitution written. And Utah's had 2 calls for a constitution convention. Utah, our legislature, has twice, well, there are 2 standing calls. They've done it other times before, and we've got them rescinded. But there are 2 standing calls from Utah for a constitution convention. And we did a pretty dang good job in Iraq, I think. I mean, here we go. We've got this Soviet-style constitution. You got the right to housing, as the government provides it. All these kinds of right of free speech, of course you've got it as limited by law. I mean, these are the kind of things that are put into that Soviet-style constitution. Government gives and government takes away. And there are people in our Congress today that believe government does give rights, and the corollary to that is that they can take them away. If they aren't God-given, you don't have them. And if you read the Declaration of Independence, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created, there's a God, equal. They are endowed by their creator, there's another reference to God, with certain inalienable rights, and mentions a few, and then it says it's the purpose of government to secure those rights. That is the very basis of our government in America today. And we could go in a lot of great detail about, how we should understand that, but that's sufficient for right now. So we helped write a Soviet-style constitution for Iraq. By golly, we set them free, didn't we? Gave them a Soviet-style constitution. And so how about the right to keep and bear arms? Oh yeah, there's a right to keep and bear arms in the Soviet style, but only government agents can keep and bear arms. Now, a lot of people do anyway, I guarantee. There's people that pack in Iraq. I hadn't thought of that before. But at any rate, only government agents can pack in Iraq. And that is constitutionally how it's interpreted, okay? So, I know for a fact we are not going to complete this today, which is fine, because I can do the second half of this while I do part 3 next time, which will go into overtime too, probably. And then we got to talk about when our next meeting is, but that'll happen afterwards, I'm sure. Okay, so I told you I was going to have this debate about water that's been in the Utah legislature, and how the Utah legislature claims that the government owns all the water in the state. And they have delegated to the governor the authority to have complete control of the water. Yeah, the legislature's kind of your brightest bulbs on the tree, and we always re-elect them. Okay, so here's the argument. The bill does not give the governor control over our water. The governor already has control of our water per the Utah Constitution. The Constitution says all water in the state is owned by the people. Here's what the Constitution really says. Article 17, Section 1. This is actually written in the Constitution, even little parenthetical statements in there. Existing rights confirmed. Okay? This is quoting underneath that. All existing rights to the use of any of the waters in this state for any useful or beneficial purpose are hereby recognized and confirmed. Okay? So they're recognizing pre-existing rights. Okay? By the way, I had a long talk. It took an extremely long time for this individual and for him to convey to me. He's a really bright guy. He was the youngest federally appointed judge ever in the nation. He was appointed to be a federal judge when he was 22. young man. He's a very old man now, and he communicates very difficult manner, but his wisdom about water is extreme. And rather than let that pass with his passing, and he's losing his ability to speak, I took prolific notes, and someday maybe we'll talk about this if you want. But the basis of his position is that every word of Utah law created since the Constitution is based upon a lie. There is not a shred of foundational basis for Utah law on water. And it was like probably 2 hours into the conversation, I'm going, I get it. It is a lie. It's a damned lie. A damn meaning it keeps you from God. Hurley, it's horrifically bad. It's based upon a falsehood that has been promulgated through all of Utah water law coming here. But the Constitution predates all of that, the Utah Constitution. So they confirm existing rights for water, okay? They changed all of that. The sons of the Utah pioneers, while they sat in the legislature, made a mess of it, and it's been made worse ever since. And it's absolutely astounding to me if you use a full analysis going back to the very beginning of it, and you'll be able to go at the end. You're right. This is a lie. So it's one that is a falsehood that's to the core. Anyway, so we go on with the argument. Who is the elected governor of the people? The governor. Our Constitution and our state code gives him full power over water. Really? Here's the code. Now remember, constitutions cannot be changed by legislative enactments. This takes a constitutional amendment to do. But there are those in the state that think we're going to pass a law, and that law is what we're going to operate on. But you cannot, national constitution, state constitution, these are the primo law, the exemplary, the overarching, and the only way it can be changed is by a constitutional amendment, legally changed. Someday people overthrow governments, and that's a mess. But at any rate, legislative things, state codes, can be changed legislature to legislature. A future legislature cannot be bound by an existing legislature or a past legislature because they're on an equal footing. So if this guy says, not this guy, let's see, the legislature says a law, and this one never says anything, and now this legislature comes in and says, by golly, we're changing that law, they can do that. But you can't change a constitution arbitrarily like that. So here's what the state code says, and I give you the code and everything else like that. Water is declared property of public. All water in this state, whether above or under the ground, are hereby declared to be the property of the public, subject to all existing rights to the use thereof. Okay, now that kind of, you could say, well, that still protects those that have them before, if you wanted to. But some people will say, oh, by golly, everybody owns the water. Oh, by the way, who's this? The governor represents everybody. And you're going to see that in the argument here again in a minute here. You'll see very quickly how perversely this is twisted, like the right of the people to keep and bear arms or the right of the state to keep and bear arms. These guys are so intent on arbitrarily and unilaterally just deciding something that they throw us under the bus and they go do whatever they darn well please. Okay, so here's the argument. Continuing, the bill reigns that power of the governor to 30 days. See, the governor owns all the water power, but we're going to say by this bill, he can only exercise it for 30 days. Yeah, right. Look what happened with the COVID con. The extended emergency, and the legislature was powerless or acted powerless to wrest that back out of the hands of the governor. And it was a criminal act is what was really happening. Okay. But so they say, you guys don't need to worry. He can only do this for 30 days. Really? If he can do it for 30 days, why can't he do it for 90 days? All he's got to do is make up his mind. Makes you want to cuss. I'm not going to, but I might. Anyway, so here's the fact. When the Constitution for Utah was created in 1895, and Utah became a state in 1896, the existing water rights granted prior to that time were recognized and continued to be in full force and effect in the newly created state. The state did not and cannot seize the right to water. You know, the guys that came a very short period of time after that really screwed this up. But here's what the Utah Constitution, Article 1, Section 1 says. All men have the inherent and inalienable right to acquire, possess, and protect property. When I bought my ground, I bought water rights also. They're mine. I purchased them. They are not subject to the control of the governor. Now, it's a share of rights for everybody that's on that water flow. And so among yourselves, you have to decide, okay, we've only got this much water this year. You're going to get your share of those rights for this much water. If there's this much water, you get your share for this much water, okay? So that's the way a water right works. You have a property right in the rights that you bought. Now, I'm getting far afield on this, but you need to understand this is how perversely legislatures mess things up on the right to keep and bear arms. And that's why I put it in here, because Utah debates this and the legislature seems to get sucked in with arguments like this all the time by the lawyers among them. Okay, so we can inherit an inalienable right to acquire, possess, and protect property. That's written right into our Constitution, and the people continue to hold the water rights in Utah. But the way the argument goes is no, the public owns it, because that's what it says in the code, and the governor is elected by the public, and so therefore the governor has the right to do what he wants to do. Okay, so this perverse view, let's look and say, okay, so it is with the inalienable right to keep and bear arms. There's always some government shill that's out there trying to figure out how to make it a collective right. As we say, it's not a nebulous collective right held by the government. It's an individual, God-given right that shall not be infringed. That's the exact wording out of the amendment, okay? So it's not just this pleasurable pastime, hunting, picking, target shooting, collecting lifestyle. It's not that. Although they may be good things, they may be pleasurable things, they may be things, and that's the only reason you do it. But that's not the way it was written or for it was written, okay? It is, in fact, an individual God-given rights. One of the inalienable rights, okay? The Second Amendment didn't create that right. It vouched it safe. That's the right that came to. It was an individual, God-given, natural law kind of right that Blackstone recognized as he wrote things about, you know, the origins of law. It's very interesting. His first volume is very interesting about how God's law is superior to all other laws, and if something's against the law, it should be tied back to that law. And he uses the example of murder. He says, you know, natural law, God's law, all of it prohibits murder. By that basis, human law can say murder is wrong. Okay, so that's the way it is. It's tied. There is a chain of command, if you will, or chain of origin that you can go back to. Again, it predates the Bill of Rights, the Constitution, the Declaration, and all the other rights that are currently granted by our Creator. Okay, it has everything to do with fighting tyranny. It's about preserving life, liberty, and property in the pursuit of happiness. And this guy, St. George Tucker, I should put a color picture of him up because they were just getting color cameras when they did. You know, okay, never mind. I'll do a color picture sometime just so you know what he looked like in color. Okay, so he was this preeminent constitutional scholar that he wrote these things. This, he wrote it in 1803. And, well, it was published in 1803 during Jefferson's presidency. He says, the Congress of the United States possesses no power to regulate or interfere with the domestic concerns or police of any state. It belongs not to them to establish any rules respecting the rights of property, nor will the Constitution permit any prohibition of arms to the people. The Constitution doesn't allow it. If they could prohibit your arms, it would have said it in there. You can't exercise a power not delegated constitutionally. That's why Trump can't do tariffs. Congress can do tariffs, but the president can't, okay? And these kind of things, like we could make a list and check it twice and find out who's naughty and nice. But the fact of the matter is you're going to find that much of what's going on violates the original intent of the American founding fathers. Okay, so, and then he goes on to say in this, or peaceably assembles, or any of these other things. These things cannot be infringed upon. The government's prohibiting it. But there's over 25,000 gun control laws on the books right now in the United States. You know, and you know what? It's with 25,000, they might have got one right that might have prevented all these mass shootings and everything, wouldn't you think? But they continue to infringe, and there's that many laws on the books. And in the next time we meet, we're going to review some books you can go read that you'll find fascinating, that document well the principles that the right to keep and bear arms actually gives you a freer, more stable society. Okay. So what they do with these gun control laws, they disarm the innocent, law-abiding citizens, and criminal elements have largely retained their firearms, and they wreak havoc on a disarmed population. Where do these mass shooters go? They go to soft targets. Generally speaking, sometimes you have somebody in a gun range that turns around and shoots somebody on a gun range. But generally speaking, virtually every one of these are soft targets. They know that nobody's going to be there to intervene on behalf of those that are their targets. Okay, it's a tragic situation that happens when you have a soft target environment. Almost everybody goes to these soft targets and uses them. Okay, so we're going to look at some international laws here, and we'll just probably take about 10 minutes on this, and then we will no longer infringe upon your evening, and we'll continue this next time we get together. But there's gun control laws that have come into vogue under tyrants of the 20th century. And they did it just before they began to wreak their havoc upon the nations of the world. So let's talk about this with Soviet citizens. Until 1929, remember they took over in 1917, the communists did. You could own a gun in the Soviet Union. Now you can't. Private ownership is completely prohibited. Kind of like it is in Iraq now that we helped them write their constitution. The Ottoman Empire, they implemented full gun control in 1911, which is odd because there was a very fine handgun that was made in 1911. And so right after they did that in the Ottoman Empire, there was an Armenian Holocaust. They killed 1.5 million people. Okay? They prohibited guns, so it's easy to do. What are you going to do? Throw rocks at them? Well, they're throwing 230 grain slugs down the Rhine at 1,000 feet per second. Anyway, here's China. They established gun control in 1935, 2 years before Japan's invasion. From 35 to 52, 20 million Chinese died. They were murdered. Mao Zedong, his Cultural Revolution, you can see the years, murdered many millions of people. Cambodia mandated gun control in 1956. Between 1975 and 77, 2 years, more than 1 million people were murdered in Cambodia. The killing fields, if you ever remember Pol Pot and his horrid reign. Okay, so by these gun control laws, despots, and by their most conservative estimate, murdered more than 56 million of their own disarmed people around the world during the 20th century. Their own people. This is not counting when Japan invaded China. This is not counting when Germany went its depredation and Hitler went across Europe, et cetera, et cetera. This was their own disarmed population. And so this is a pretty serious thing. There's other examples. Civilian ownership gets banned. They impose gun controls, and then they murder their people. That happens time after time after time. Their own disarmed people suffer under the hands of these tyrants. Okay, so we've got enough time to maybe talk a little bit about the Nazi Weapons Act of 1938. You will have seen it reflects, now think about these things as we go through some of these concepts. It began to be reflected very much in the 1968 gun control law and has continued forward. And you'll see how this has been replicated in the United States largely. Of course, we're going to see too what the United States did in the 1930s, which was a precursor to this, which was similar to what Hitler was doing in Nazi Germany. But so here's the Nazi Weapons Act of 1938, classified guns for sporting purposes. Why would you need a detachable magazine that holds 30 rounds to go out and shoot a deer? Are they in Kevlar vests? I mean, have you heard some of these arguments that some of these politicians make? Why would anyone want this weapon of war to go deer hunting with? Got news for you kids, that's not why the Second Amendment exists. It's protecting a God-given right to respond to tyrants. Of course, most politicians don't want you to believe that, okay? But they said it's for sporting purposes. And I will tell you that in the 1990s, when I met with some of our representatives, or congressmen, senator guys, and they were guys, and they were tyrants, and they lied through their teeth, and all these kind of things. But they said, oh no, we protected as many guns as we could when we passed these laws. We protected over 600 guns. What's wrong with you guys? Don't you have enough choices? No, I want this kind, and you eliminated it. Okay. So anyway, this idea of sporting purposes. Well, okay. Well, if you wanted to purchase, you had to register with the Nazi officials and have a background check. Have you ever heard of when you go in to get a firearm? We've got to check and see if you're clear, okay? Okay, so they exempted Nazis from this stuff, and if you're not a Nazi, you had to go through the hoops, or maybe didn't get a gun, okay? But if you were a Nazi, hey, that's a good reason to join the Nazi party, don't you think? See how people think sometimes, I'm going to sign up for that, baby. I get to buy my gun without being checked. Okay, so Nazis had unrestricted power to decide what kinds of firearms could or would be owned by private persons. So, they put in these things. Now, you're going to be shocked at this, but when I was a kid, I know you think it's 200 years ago, I could go into a gun shop and I could buy a firearm. I could order one online. I mean, I really could. I had these parents that sometimes interfered with that, but it nevertheless was something you could do. Okay, so private persons started to get restricted. And again, this is under the Nazis, so I don't want you to assume that I'm trying to make a complete statement on United States laws, but what type of ammunition were legal was subject to control by bureaucrats. Nazis said this. We can only have these kinds of ammunition, okay? So, juveniles under 18 could not buy firearms and ammunition. Does this sound like something that we might be doing? I don't know. It's something to think about. That's our dialogue today. That was passed in 1938. Now that really was only, 87 years ago? See, I was born after that, in case you're wondering. But the fact of the matter is, it's not that long ago. But as we look at the American philosophies, we're going to see that our stuff has been kind of a rolling dialogue all along this whole thing. Okay, so they modified that the day after Kristallnacht. That was the night that the Germans went out and they broke all the glass in the Jewish businesses and all that kind of stuff. That's why it's called the Crystal Night. Say again?
Pillage and burn.
Yeah, and plunder, whatever you want to do. Kind of like Black Lives Matter or some of these other things that they do regularly nowadays. Okay, so November 11th, 1938, they modified that 1938 Weapons Act, and I put the wording down and I put their tense of when it was done. Jews are prohibited from acquiring, and so on. And then I put in parentheses, were that time prohibited from acquiring. So anyway, Jews were prohibited from acquiring, possessing, and carrying firearms and ammunition, as well as truncheons, stabbing weapons. Those now possessing weapons and ammunition are at once, immediately, to turn them over to the local police authority. Okay? So by golly, you guys that are Jews, you can't have any guns. Now we know how happily ever after this turned out. Okay? Okay, firearms and ammunition found in a Jew's possession were forfeited to the government without compensation. Okay? The 1930s gun control in the United States was no exception to this movement to disarm citizens. So the 1934 National Firearms Act controlled fully automatic machine guns, short-barreled shotguns, short rifles, and they had a federal tax to sell or transfer these firearms. Okay, so this was sold on a number of levels to the United States population. You know what? People have to pay us a tax if they're going to buy these things. They're prohibited. You know what? It'll be a revenue stream to the United States. It's a good idea, isn't it? And you're going to see, not tonight, but at another time. In fact, we better almost be done here. The problem was that this was a charade that had no justification in anything. We're going to find in the Miller case that actually the Miller case, in its ruling, justifies any kind of firearm that's used by the military that can be owned by the people. And it's twisted and perverted among the people today because of the way it's sold by the spin. Okay, so let's end now. Let's start with when we get back next time, we'll start with the 1938 National Firearms Act, which came 4 years after that original one I just talked about, the fully automatics, the short barrel shotguns, and so on. Okay, so we're going to find the case too when we get together, the Miller case that was adjudicated by the Supreme Court on false pretenses, et cetera, which people now use as justification for government firearms laws, which in absolute reality justifies the use of you having any firearm you choose. But we'll get to that next time because we're out of time. But 1938 Firearms Act is a good place to start next time. And we will remember that. We've got a lot left in this one to do, and then we got the next one together, but I used up my time on the review of the first one to keep it in context. So let's turn it back over to you, Enoch, and see where you go from here. And somebody's got to remind me when we start. Well, I'll remember 1938. It was a very bad year all around the world. The Nazis had a 1938 law. So did the United States.
Yeah, probably take the mic.
Oh,
you have one mic today.
The Michael. Yeah, we're being rather formal. How in the world? There we go.
Thank you, Scott, for coming. Appreciate you again. And this is amazing stuff, right? Just knowing the history, knowing, not that this isn't about winning arguments, but boy, you can win a lot of arguments, right? And it's more about educating people who just don't understand, and they, it sounds like a good idea to keep guns out of criminals' hands, right? But that's not the whole point. And the history shows us so much. And it's a famous quote, how Japan wouldn't invade the United States because there would be a gun behind every blade of grass. And I recently heard the same thing, the same argument came from Russia also, Cold War era. So have you ever heard that, Scott?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it really is. There's probably at least 300 million firearms and maybe 700 million. Who knows what it is? I hope you all have at least 5.
Yeah, in the United States. So an invading army knows, even if you make a plan, this is kind of what I heard that the Soviet argument was in their Cold War times, was what would we even do if we won to invade America? Phase 2, how do you fight off 300 million armed Americans, right? Yeah, and so a well-regulated militia keeps you free. So simple. It's a very basic principle, right? And I also love that the right to self-defense is the first law of nature. So all these good things that we learn, and gosh, I just wish everybody just, could absorb that. But you guys are the elite constitutionalists that are studying.
Well, the committees of correspondence, literally.
Yep.
They help train others.
Absolutely, right. And so, Julie, I don't know if you can put that message on the screen there. But just inviting anyone watching this, we actually talk about that, the committees of correspondence and the committees of safety, and how we kind of study that and make it part of the liberty movement going forward. And we have a book on our website at defendingutah.org you guys can pick up. But anyway, thank you for coming tonight. We'll close for the evening, and we will meet again on October. I'll give you the date, actually. October 10th. Okay, so I will trust my lovely assistant, and October 10th should be a Friday in October. And we'll continue with this Second Amendment and finish it off. So thank you for coming.